If you are someone who has the temerity to run for office and take all the crap that you have to take and go through the process again and again, and it ain't no fun lots of days, because you want to do the right thing and support your constituents and speak on their behalf, then you are doing a great service for your community and your country. And that deserves respect.
Hey everyone, it's Disagreeing Well, the podcast about polarization, why it matters, what drives it, and what we should be doing about it. I'm your host, John Malloy, and although we plan to take a bit of a summer break, we're bringing you a special bonus episode with former BC Premier Christy Clark, an old friend who I first met through politics back in 1993. Christy now hosts her own podcast, the popular Christy Clark Show, and we decided to record a joint episode that became a fascinating conversation about politics, leadership, and the challenge of polarization. I hope that you enjoy this very special summer episode.
Hey, John Malloy, thanks for deciding to do this, bringing me on board for it. I love it.
I know. I should thank you for inviting me on your show, and you can thank me for inviting you on my show, or however it works. Anyway, welcome to Disagreeing Well, and I guess you're welcoming me to the Christy Clark Show.
Well, yes, and I will find things to disagree about, John. I'm 100% sure. We'll do it well, though.
We'll do it well.
But I do want to say your show is great. This whole idea of disagreeing and finding a path forward that, where you can just really talk about things. I think it's skills building for a lot of people in a world where we're only exposed to just like constant anger. And I think it's important what you're doing.
No, well, thank you. And I'm loving your show and the cross-section of people that you have on, some of whom I know, many of whom I don't, but learning a lot about the state of politics, both in Canada and I know you've gone international with figures like John Bolton and former ambassadors and things like that. So it's great to bring our efforts together here.
But John, was there anything that happened for you that made you want to do this specifically? Because you're spending a lot of time, intellectual energy, devoting, on this subject. Was there a trigger for you?
I don't think there was an individual event that triggered this. I think and I'm very anxious to hear what you have to say. I think when you leave politics, you start to become less partisan, less convinced that you had all the right answers or that your party has all the right answers as you continue sort of experiencing it as a bystander. But as I started my work in the university, I was very alarmed at what's happening out there in terms of public debate. And I want to make it very clear right at the start that when we talk about polarization, it's not necessarily about holding strong views or believing that your views are the best way forward. It's about believing that it's almost like on a moral plane. It's not a question of I'm right and you're wrong. It's I'm right, you're an idiot, you're a bad person, you're anti-Semitic, you're racist, you need to be silenced, you need to be dismissed. When can we get rid of you? I'm not even going to give you the dignity of answering the concerns that you're raising. It's that sort of I shouldn't say almost, hatred of the other side for their ideas and what they stand for. And it's just, it's growing, and it's certainly affected our political system, but you see it in the media, you see it in personal interactions, and quite frankly, you see it on campus all the time. And when I first started at the university, I was director of the center. I still am director of the Center for Public Ethics. And it was so much of our work was issue-based. And as we started to drill down on issues, I realized, these are important issues, but the overarching issue is our inability to talk about them with any degree of civility, with sort of any respect for the other side. It's as I say, I'm right and you're an idiot. I don't want to have anything to do with you. So that's that became apparent. And we've done some work on polarization at the institution I teach at. We actually held 2 conferences on it. And the podcast seemed to be the next logical step. But I mean, I'm anxious. I've got a chance to talk to you in your role as a former premier politician, political activist, and I think some people. I say this with respect. Some people might be surprised. You're interviewing Christy Clark. She's a very partisan person, or she was a partisan person as premier. And I guess the question is, did you see that difference between being partisan? And as I say, I don't see anything wrong with saying, look, we're right. I mean, I hope politicians say we've got the best way. I'd like to say the best way forward, not that, we're the way forward, but the opposition has a way, and, you're going to make your choice, but we're the right way, as opposed to we are somehow morally superior and the folks across the way are evil. Like, how did you deal with that as someone who was sort of enthusiastically partisan?
Well, I think there's two features of British Columbia that are unique, not entirely unique across the country, but I mean, maybe different from Ontario in some ways. The first one is that in BC, it's an eternal battle between New Democrats on the left and everybody else who's not on the left, because there are more New Democrat voters in BC than anywhere else. So what it's done is, rather than having a 3-party system, you basically have a 2-party system. And, I really do think that the strength of Canadian dialogue in politics has been largely influenced by the fact that there's been, for the most part, 3 parties competing. And so people are fighting for the center, and liberals, I mean, more recently, liberals want New Democrat votes and conservatives want liberal votes. And it's that overlap that requires accommodation in Canada, in comparison to the United States as the perfect example, right? The more obvious example. So in BC, you basically have a 2-party system. And that means it's a lot more naturally partisan than lots of other provinces. It's kind of the free enterprise versus socialism in BC. But the other thing was interesting from my perspective, that speaks to a less partisan approach, is that if you're not, because the 2 parties are always fighting for the center, what happens on the right of center, the non-NDP vote, is there's an agreement that people can disagree on everything else within, say, the Liberal Party, the Social Credit Party, the BC United Party, and all its iterations over history, will agree on everything else, can disagree on everything else, except for the fact that we all want economic growth. We are all what we call free enterprisers. So in my experience of that was, you have to accommodate people. So I'm pro-choice, pro LGBTQ, all those kinds of classic liberal things. And we had people who were virulently pro-life in the caucus. We had people who were pro-death penalty in the caucus. We had people who were anti-gay in the caucus. And what I learned was, it was worth the time to sit down and find a way not to resolve those issues, but to recognize each other's humanity and understand that other people just felt differently than I did. And then that was okay, because there were lots of other things that we needed to agree on. And that really shaped me, I think, So yeah, partisan in public, but privately in our caucus, it was a very let's find agreement here, let's find common ground kind of group.
And I mean, that's so different than what we're seeing. Perhaps, people know my partisan background, but perhaps in the Conservative Party, they have made room for conservative voices on social issues. But certainly, the Liberal Party, where you and I our roots are, has basically said you're not welcome in the party. So I mean, it's interesting that you were able to deal with that dynamic. I mean, did you get pushback from some of the more progressive members of your party or of your caucus for allowing people who had these conservative views that were quite unpopular?
Not really. Interesting. I'd never really thought about that. I mean, it just never was it was never something that people got focused on. We kind of had an agreement, like internally, when you became a BC Liberal or a Social Credit member before that, the understanding was, okay, here's what we agree on, folks. Now, I would often go into caucus when there were disagreements about stuff. And I would say, look, what do we all agree on here? We need a bigger economy.
Yeah.
That was the thing. But, so there were other examples that are not sort of these issues of conscience as we sometimes characterize them. But they would be on Indigenous rights, for example. How much do we accommodate First Nations people? That would be and what's the balance between, fighting climate change and exporting natural resources? So those kinds of things would be topics we would really engage on from a partisan or from a kind of a more polarized perspective. But we would always kind of, I found myself being the honest broker, or a broker, maybe not everybody thinks politicians are very honest, trying to figure out a way through that. And, it's interesting, John. I mean, I'm interested in your thoughts about this, because you and I are both churchgoers, Christians. And, we meet a lot of people who have different views on, we have some very close friends actually who are very strongly pro-life, who have questions about whether, whether or not it's moral to be gay, or all those kinds of things. We know those people. Some of those are our friends. And how did you feel being a member of the Liberal Party of Canada caucus and having Justin Trudeau say, you're not allowed to be here if you hold those other views that many other Canadians hold? Like, how did that sit with you?
Yeah, I mean, I was never part of the federal Liberal caucus, but certainly as an outsider, I was quite troubled by that. I think a formula of saying, look, this is the federal Liberal policy, which is 100% pro-choice, and if you're going to be a part of the party, we expect you to follow that policy, or that is our policy, that sort of thing. I think that, and perhaps, the nuance is lost, but I think there's a nuance between that and saying anyone who is pro-life is not allowed to join. Someone who says, you know what, I'm not very comfortable with the status quo on abortion. I'm still a liberal. I support the policies of the Liberal Party on a variety of issues. But on that one, I'm gonna be the one in the room who's not cheering very loudly. That was not allowed. You had to go through, I heard from people who were running federally, you had to go through sort of a battery of tests. I used to, in frustration, call them purity tests, to make sure that you would in no way ever think of deviating, that this would be your position. And then there was this sort of strange thing that they grandparented in certain members of parliament. I think of John McKay, who's now retired. I have a great deal of respect for. John was from Toronto. He was pro-life. He wasn't, he didn't get elected trying to change laws in Canada or change the Liberal Party, but that was his position. And it was sort of like, well, John, you can stay because you're already a sitting MP, but when you retire, which he has, we're going to make sure that candidate in no way mirrors your views on abortion. And I found the whole thing bizarre. Not that somehow I expected Justin Trudeau to say, well, the Liberal Party is going to, be a pro-life party, or, we're on the fence on abortion. He could say, our party, this is their stand. And I recognize there may be people in caucus who don't agree the way you said it. I was part of the provincial Liberal caucus, and I always joke when people ask me, did you ever disagree with your government on any policy positions they took? And I always say, well, usually by about 9:30 in the morning, unless I started work early. I mean, you never wanted to be around me when I came back from cabinet or caucus, because I would come in just furious at, whatever I felt was a stupid position we were taking. That's part of being politics. I bet you even you as premier were in positions where you were, having to bring forward policies because it was sort of the popular will or the consensus, and even you didn't like them that much. I mean, I'm sure there were moments that you've had to compromise a bit as you bring forward things.
Yeah, absolutely, all the time. And you're challenging me to try and remember, because I only remember all the great things that happened. That's my optimism.
You don't have to share any secrets. I'm just saying that it's funny because members of the public don't believe that party leaders can actually, I don't want to say be forced, but party leaders sometimes have to carry the water a bit. They have to come forward with policies that represent the consensus that they themselves are not 100. It's not a dictatorship, despite what some of the critics say.
It's true. And you do sometimes do things that you don't really want to do, but that's the way of the world, and you've got to find a way to get through it, and you don't always get what you want. I think, there are these different styles of leadership, and we may be in a post kind of agreement style, a post compromising style of leadership in the world these days. And because, Prime Minister Carney, who I think is doing a terrific job, doesn't appear to be someone, he's not really taking a whole lot of advice, I don't think, from folks in caucus. And he's got his path. He's very focused. He's getting her done. And he proves the point that sometimes just being focused on what you want to do can really work. But he is a little bit like Justin Trudeau in that respect, except that Justin Trudeau was doing a whole bunch of stuff that I really disagreed with when he made his own path, because I don't think Justin Trudeau listened to anybody except for the unelected advisors that were working in his office. And I always thought that it was cavalier and disrespectful to operate that way, because my view of it is, and I always have held this view very, very strongly, if you are someone who has the temerity to run for office and take all the crap that you have to take and go through the process again and again, and it ain't no fun lots of days, because you want to do the right thing and support your constituents and speak on their behalf, then you are doing a great service for your community and your country. And that deserves respect. And if you're an MLA or a member of parliament or an MPP, and you're not being listened to, you're being completely ignored, or you're being muzzled, that is profoundly disrespectful, not just to the elected person, but to all the constituents that elected them. And I've always held that we should allow people to speak in our parliaments about what they feel strongly about, because otherwise, I think you denigrate your democracy.
But I guess the killer question for you is, you've spoken about working with your own caucus, but what about the opposition? Were there times when you listened to the opposition? Were there times when you may have disagreed with them, but you sort of gave them the benefit of the doubt? Because I find the thing about politics, and I'm certainly in no way saying that I didn't do this, is you rarely miss that opportunity to take a cheap shot. The party across the way is there for all the wrong reasons. They're there to enrich their friends. They're there because they're ideological pariahs. You just any opportunity to sort of kick the opposition. And I find that sort of disturbing, that there isn't that sort of recognition. Just as you said, they're there to usually for the exact same reasons and to achieve the exact same thing. So I don't know. Did you have examples of I guess both good and bad, and how you dealt with the opposition?
I think the media coverage really complicates our ability to be able to do that. Even back then, before social media, the minute you give an inch to the other guys, it was, at least here anyway, I always felt like it was reported as a defeat, as a weakness. As a woman in politics, where you're already naturally assumed to be weak by virtue of your sex, you really can't. It's really very hard to show any weakness. I think, though, there were examples, though, where we stole ideas and took them as our own and never admitted that they were the other side's ideas. And I think I could think of a few examples like that where we might have found some common agreement. But our parliament was so partisan. John, I reflect, when I think back to that, I think that in BC, in our province, because it's a two-party system, it works to be partisan. But I think about Pierre Poilievre, and he was so partisan in the last election that he lost a 30-point lead to Mark Carney, who doesn't appear to be partisan. I think that's a good example of how, I don't think he is as extreme as the media presents him to be. But I think the sense that he's dangerous somehow really took hold for people, and his partisanship really worked against him. So I keep saying I think we kind of are observing two separate systems here. I mean, I do it at the same time. It just seems like the federal system is a lot more amenable to overlap between parties than the experience that I had, which is why I think people think I'm so partisan, which is actually why I did behave in such a, reflect such a partisan posture.
And as I said, right, or we discussed right at the beginning, partisan doesn't necessarily need to be polarizing. I remember, and this is perhaps a bit obscure, but it just struck with me that one day, and I mean, there's hundreds of examples like this. I turned on the news, and Andrew Scheer was the leader of the Conservative Party, and he said Justin Trudeau doesn't care about veterans, and that just stuck with me for so long. If Andrew Scheer had said, you know what, the Liberal Party talks a good game when it comes to veterans, and yet the policies they brought forward are a cup of water in the ocean, a Dixie cup in the ocean. But if you actually listen to what he said, he was accusing the Prime Minister of not caring about veterans. And you could like Justin Trudeau or not, but I'm sure Justin Trudeau respected veterans. I'm sure, any number of insults like that. Doug Ford hates, or maybe not hate, usually Doug Ford doesn't care about children with autism. Mm-hmm. I'm sure Doug Ford does. If you say, look, his policies are wrongheaded or they're ineffective, but it's that whole kind of it's almost this sort of moral plane that we're the only ones who care. I was the minister in charge of community and social services was a portfolio, but in charge of the poverty file. And occasionally I would maybe lose my temper a bit in the legislature and say, we're not. Sorry, now I'm being partisan, and maybe I don't know if I'm making my point or not. But the New Democrats would go after me, and I would say, you don't have a monopoly on compassion. Every party in the House cares about poverty, cares about the environment, cares about a variety of issues. How are we going to address them? We have very, very different ways of approaching it. Oftentimes we don't, but perhaps we pretended to. And, at the end of the day, that kind of Justin Trudeau hates veterans, Christy Clark hates poor people, whatever, John Malloy hates poor people. I mean, I was told that again and again as the minister. I just think it's that edge to things which I just find so disturbing in our political discourse.
An example for that for me was the long running, endless disputes with the teachers union in BC. And it was, I mean, to this day, like people happily, most people remember me fondly now. I get like people all the time, you got to come back into politics, Christy. We really need you, right? It wasn't that way 10 years ago. But the teachers, they still have the cudgel. They're still fighting the fight. And it was vicious and terrible. And, it was really the angriest I'd ever seen people. People would call me names, in public. They'd have signs up and I would look at them and I'd think, you are teaching children in schools, and you're teaching them not to bully. I hope you're teaching them not to call people names. I mean, that's basic part of kind of your whole kindergarten to grade 3 experience is, to be civilized. And it was really, really surprising for me. And my dad was a school teacher for all his entire career, to see that kind of anger expressed from a group that was so that had dedicated their lives to teaching children. Now, that's not all teachers, but it was the people that were, that were activists in the union. And it taught me a lot about the two sides of people, of the multiplicity of sides that people have in them. And so, people do that. They go from one day to being at the office and being really, really nice and getting along with everybody and helping the person at the next desk, and then going out at night and getting in a bar fight. That's just humanity. It's not the best side of humanity, but I think we have lost the ability in lots of fora to be able to actually manage to be our best selves most of the time. And we have too much permission and encouragement to be our worst selves, on the other side of it. And that's just, that has been a terrible diminishment of our social discourse and our whole society.
But I'm gonna ask a tough question. Do you look back and wish were there times that you took the cheap shot, or that you were overly polarizing that you wish you weren't? I mean, has your distance from being in politics made you reconsider some of the those moments, or some of the stands that you took, or the way you took those stands?
Oh yeah, I'm sure there's lots of examples of that, John. I mean, look, I made a lot of mistakes. I think everybody feels that when they look back at all of it. I think that I'm not sure we could have done anything to fix the teachers thing. Mm-hmm. But I think that we probably could have done more, spent more money than we'd saved. I mean, when I look back, okay, this isn't the most controversial decision that anybody's ever made, but on a big picture, I got so focused on making sure that we didn't just balance the budget, but that we eliminated our debt in BC. We came very, very close to it before the government changed. That we weren't spending enough money on things, on people, on kids, on, unemployment benefits, on First Nations people. Like there was a lot of we could have done more good things toward the end of it, but we got to be a little bit penny pinching, a little bit focused on the numbers, on the, the financial results, like as though we were a corporation reporting to shareholders or something. And that's not how government works. I regret that. And that's very big picture, but I think we could have done a lot more good before the government had ended, before, if we thought about it differently.
And that could have translated into being a little more, and I don't know the context, but, being a little more, maybe I'll put it this way, a little less judgmental of those who were calling for more investments in key areas. Because I know what it's like to be in government. I mean, I'm right. And the public, I joked, I wrote a little book on faith and polarization. And I think paraphrased George Bernard Shaw, who said, it's too bad. The problem with the public is they just don't make them like they used to. We need to redo the public, because the public doesn't understand how brilliant we are and how great we are. And my gosh, we need a new public, and how dare they want to, more money to be invested in an area, because they don't understand the big picture. They don't understand. Mm-hmm. And yet I think that feeds, a lot of what's wrong is this sort of inability to perhaps think it through. And maybe it's not going to change the policy, but just not to vilify, the people who are asking for more or what have you, because good grief, it's hard for a lot of people out there. And I think politicians sometimes think, well, we're the only ones who, it's all too complicated. It's all
Well, and I think politicians often, by the way, I will recommend to your listeners that book, Faith and Polarization. It's fantastic. People should buy it, read it, and review it on Amazon. That's what I'm going to say, because I love the book, and it's not it's a quick read too. It's smart, quick read.
Don't lend it to anyone. Buy an extra copy. Give it as a gift, right?
Yes.
I think politicians always sometimes feel a little too hard done by, that they're the only ones who understand the complexities of the world, and it's too bad about the public, because if they understood it, or your adversaries, not just the public in general, but your adversaries in terms of interest groups or whoever that are going forward, they don't understand how complex it is. And, I just think, as I look back, there's some truth to that. But I also think that politicians need to listen and need to respect the fact that, life is not easy for everyone, and they have real demands.
Yeah. And I think it's true that government has kind of a shelf best before date. There's no doubt about it. And part of it is, and you see it with everybody, like you see it with governments all the time. They get too focused on what's going on inside. I've got a job to do here. Here's my job to do this. And, your brain space that used to be devoted to, what do people want me to do? What do as versus what I've decided we should be doing, that whole space in your brain starts to shrink. That's a problem. So that's a very real thing.
So listen, what do we do? What's the solution? You're in the best position on earth because you've left it all, and yet you've got a microphone in front of you. So what do we do to create this? Just, it doesn't have to be, let's get rid of partisanship. Let's get rid of that sort of polarizing aspect that just ignores, belittles, dismisses, vilifies the other, and somehow presents as we have what we feel is the best way forward, but there are other ways forward, and we're willing to give a little bit. That doesn't necessarily mean compromise, but engage in a little bit of respectful dialogue. What do you see from your vantage point now, post politics?
I think that political parties should have to choose leaders who are going to be open-minded to change and to broadening their perspective on things. And both Justin Trudeau and Pierre Poilievre have been pretty doctrinaire about where they sit on the spectrum. And so for that to change, we need to the members of political parties and the public need to demand we want a different kind of leader. So when Carney had that unexpected election result, I think, and Poilievre had a very unexpected result on the other side of it. I think what it demonstrated is, oh, wait a minute, people do want something different. And my assumption is that, if that view holds, the Conservatives will elect a different kind of leader, someone different from Mr. Poilievre. And if they do that, then you've got two leaders, both of whom are kind of moderate and playing across the field of the political spectrum, arguing against each other. I think that makes for a better kind of outcome for us. We can all make a choice based on, it doesn't have to be a choice on, oh my God, I hate one guy, so I'm voting for the other guy. We want a system where we can say, you know what, I think they're all doing they've all got some good points. When I always thought that Thomas Mulcair, and I'm not a New Democrat, was a great leader for the New Democrats because he really moderated the whole discussion on the stage. If it had been Harper, Mulcair, and a different Liberal leader, we might have had a very different result for Canada right now. So, it's not just Poilievre who's been kind of the problem. I think Justin Trudeau was the opposite side of that on the center left. So I think people have to demand it, John. I don't know if there's another way around that. I think that we have to demand it, and people like you doing your show has a big impact on that.
Well, hopefully, we've had such a cross section of people to talk about the psychology of it and the politics of it, and what practitioners are doing and that sort of thing. One of the things we haven't talked about is social media, the way that fundraising is tied to social media. You hear about MPs, I think, on all sides of the House, and I'm sure this happens provincially as well. You say something outrageous so they can get your clip, you post it on Twitter, or you send it out saying, look, this is what's happening. Send us money. Send us, and it's this constant campaigning, and it's constant sort of trying to throw the red meat to the base, which I think has been so dangerous. It's been,
and I'm not sure we can fix that, John. But we can stop replying to those. People can opt out. People can decide. I really don't. Yeah, there isn't, I think, a better answer than that we need to decide as a society that we want something different. And we're not going to participate in that.
Politicians, I agree with you. I always joke that politicians are sort of simple animals. They do what's going to get them votes. And, if those at the top start to realize there's an incentive to be less polarizing. Again, it's certainly this back and forth between the voters and the politicians.
This has been great, John. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Nice to see you. I'll see you in real life one day soon.
You bet.
Keep up the fight and keep it civil.
And you keep up the show too. I look forward to future episodes.
Thanks, John.
I really hope that you enjoyed this special bonus episode of Disagreeing Well. We'll be taking a short break over the summer, but unless society's divisions magically disappear, we'll be back again in the fall. You've been listening to Disagreeing Well, the podcast about polarization, a production of the Center for Public Ethics at Martin Luther University College, federated with Wilfrid Laurier University, located in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada. Disagreeing Well is produced and edited by Piper Force, with additional production and promotional support from Hardika Ahuja. Our theme music is Stuck in Dreams by Kulakova, courtesy of Pixabay. You can find Disagreeing Well on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also follow us on our free Substack, where you'll find links to each episode, show notes, and articles and blogs related to the work of the Center for Public Ethics. Thanks for listening.